everybody, and welcome to North 100, a Canadian Highlander podcast. I'm Serge, and joining me today, I have a Jer.
Hello.
And a Wheeler.
Hot dog mama.
A reminder, this podcast is brought to you by you with your support over the Patreon at patreon.com/loadingreadyrun. Welcome to our Zendikar Rising Part 3 set review. Reminder, this is a Canadian Highlander review, so this is not exhaustive. We're not talking about every single card. We're not even talking about every single color. Today, we're only talking about green and gold, and all of the cards are going to be reviewed from this format's perspective. So if it's good in modern or vintage or limited, only care about our particular stack of 100 cards. Let's dive into it with Ancient Green Warden, 6 mana, 5/7 elemental for 4 green, has reach. Ooh. You may play lands from your graveyard. Go on. If a land entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time.
Serge, I have 2 words for you. Grazing Gladeheart.
I know. Can you imagine every time you play one land, that humble Antelope gives you 4 life?
It's unbeatable.
Is it, though? It's a 6-drop. It's just a big Wheeler sigh.
I also have 2 words for you. Glacial Chasm.
Land entering the battlefield. All right.
You sack 2 lands.
You have to sack 2, but it's not like the cumulative upkeep gets more expensive at that point.
No, I'm saying this is a good thing.
Oh, okay.
Because you get 2 ETB blow up your own land triggers.
Oh, but then you can play it again after? Yeah, okay.
Well, yeah, effectively, because you get to...
Oh, wait, is it an ETB or like an as it comes into play?
It's an ETB, so you can play it with that ability on the stack to sack. You could tap a land to do a thing. If you have an Urborg, you can tap itself and sacrifice itself. Like if we're talking about Fastband loops, which is, I assume, what we're talking about.
Oh, yeah, let's loop. We're looping.
Yeah. So with this, because that's a card, Glacial Chasm's a card where when people have talked about this card so far, they go oh, well, what if you have Glacial Chasm? It's bad. You sack 2 lands. But no, that's a good thing.
Nah, look. Glacial Chasm is so powerful. The loops that enables you to do, and the fact that you effectively put yourself a little protection bubble for a number of turns, it's unbelievably broken. The slight downside is actually negated by Ancient Greenwood as well, in that you can just play the lands again. Maybe in some weird bizarro world, you'll be a little bit short on land if you have to sack it, but you already have 6 mana. You just cast a 6-drop. It's not that big of a downside, especially if you can just play the lands from your graveyard again. My worry is, pros, obviously this is nuts in a lands deck that wants to be a combo deck, right? This is a combo enable piece with its interactions with Fastband specifically and creating loops over and over. It makes the clock a lot. If you're already going infinite, you only care about the crucible effect. You don't really care about the double effect. It's an interesting sort of middle piece, but it's very expensive.
But it can help you find extra things, like double triggering landfall can get you more mana / cards depending on what other things you have in play.
Yeah.
So it can help get you to the point where you're actually just going somewhere as opposed to spinning wheels.
How do you feel about this in the mid-range lands deck that people have seen more, as opposed to the style I really enjoyed, which is the all-in combo lands?
I don't mind it. I think this might be, as a really, really short mini tangent, which everybody collectively groans about. I think that with all these, all these cards are busted, right? Or not busted, but they're very strong. All the cards that we've been receiving for Canlander in the past couple of sets, there's a lot of really good things going on, which means that I think we have seen and will continue to see more sub-genres of pre-existing sub-archetypes, right? You'll have a mid-range lands deck, your combo lands deck, and then you'll have slightly more mid-range, but still a bit of combo, and then slightly more combo, but still a bit of mid-range. And cards like this are perfect for that, where, I don't know, I look at this card and I think, well, it's just another thing that you can natural order Green Sun into.
Yeah.
Outside of Ramanap.
Yeah.
That also just kills people, because a lot of these lands cards just kill people.
Yeah.
Right? Titania, Prime
It's
Time.
also got 7 toughness, so it's a super reasonable thing to just put into play ahead of schedule. You can just blindly tap out for it, and you're probably not going to die, and it's probably
Yeah, you're not too sad, right? Like you just like, I'll play this as an early threat, and suddenly you have a board presence, which a land deck doesn't often have. I like that it's not legendary, which a lot of the higher, more expensive land synergy cards often are. I'm talking about your Molokus, your Tatianas, your Tatiovas, a lot of those cards are extra vulnerable. They're very expensive. They actually have a very tiny body, and they're vulnerable to Krakus. This has none of those downsides.
This also has, and this isn't a joke, reach, which is really good at locking in that whole, hey, you could play this and it can help you survive.
Yeah, it's a bit like World Breaker in that respect, that it's just like a big Chungus that has reach and isn't going to die to any flyers.
Yeah, because so many games you'll have this card, you're like, well, I'm going to develop a board, and then a dragon kills you, and you're like, oh.
Or even a Cleek. You just can't stop
Yeah.
the Cleek from getting those last couple points of damage. Can I just call attention to the fact that it only doubles the triggers that you control? So if your opponent has an Ankh of Mishra or a Zozu the Punisher or something like that, there's no downside, which is kind of amazing, actually.
Oh my god, that makes Grazing Gladeheart perfect. 1 damage from Fastband, 2 from the Zozu. 4 damage from the Gladeheart. Or 4 life from the Gladeheart.
Take that, hate cards.
Yeah.
So, I mean, maybe I should be more excited about this card, and maybe that's the reaction the audience wanted more of, like, oh my god, have you read Ancient Greenwood? I love it. I'm going to play
Like, it is still 6 mana.
It's still 6 mana. That's the hard part. I mean, look, I'm playing a lot of 5s. Previously, the only 6-drop I was going to play was...
Primeval Titan.
Thank you. I was like, Green Sun Titan. No, Serge. Green Sun Titan. Like, no, Serge, that's not right.
Yeah.
I know. Green Sun Titan.
Primeval Sun Zenith.
Yeah, I think we've talked about that card enough. Let's move on to Ashaya, Soul of the Wild. 5 mana Star legendary elemental for 3 green. Its power and toughness are equal to the number of lands you control, and non-token creatures you control are a forest in addition to their other types. Jer.
This card's kind of cool, but that second ability is such a huge, humongous, very large downside. Like, all
How
I
so?
ever want to do is have somebody play this, and then I Armageddon Plaguewind their board.
Yeah, that's real bad.
Yeah.
Real bad.
It'll hit Ashaya as well. It doesn't say other.
Yeah, no, they're all gone. They get to keep their tokens,
Oh, big oof.
but they have no lands or creatures anymore. And like this is a cool card. It can ramp you and get big, but for a 5-drop in our format, it's just not good enough, especially with that huge blowout potential.
For what it's worth, I hate this card. That's not really what I wanted to focus on. I really dislike this card just as like in the format. Like, I just don't think there's only one thing that I think it's ever going to do that'll end up being relevant. And I will say this: somebody will play it against me, and I'll die to it, and they'll hold it over my head, and it's like, okay, but like, I don't know if this is a great card for you. It's just going to lead to more feel bads or whatever. But I should say that it's pretty reasonable with Quirion Ranger. Like, you can do some combos where
That's kind of cool.
you can, there's some setups, some combos with Quirion Ranger and Scrib Ranger in this card.
Sure.
And like, it's a 5.
Like the pod creature or whatever, if you're looking to get some free untaps.
Yeah, like I'm thinking about like a blue-green opposition-y style deck that could theoretically play Vanifar plus those 2 creatures in their deck.
And I guess if you have 2 of the Rangers in play, you can get and like an Intruder Alarm or something you can get.
Yeah. Well, this doesn't Ashaya Quirion Ranger just go infinite?
Yeah, with Intruder Alarm. You're right.
No, by itself, right? You tap the Ashaya to add a green. You activate Quirion Ranger. Your target to untap Ashaya. And your cost is returning a forest, which is Quirion Ranger.
Oh, yeah.
So Quirion Ranger goes back, Ashaya is untapped, and you have 1 green floating.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
All right.
But that's like it. And even then, I'm like, but why do you need to do that?
There's better ways to get infinite mana.
Yeah, exactly.
You can have infinite, like, creature ETB or whatever. I don't know. No, that's fair. All right, cool. Let's move on to Balagued Recovery. 5 mana sorcery for 2 and a green. Return target card from your graveyard to your hand. And on the other side, we have Balagued Sanctuary, a green source that enters the battlefield tapped. 3 mana regrowth. What do you think, Jer?
This card is really good. Regrowth is definitely one of those effects that you like really want to find ways to just like jam into your deck, but often doesn't quite make the cut, or like you're cutting something you really want, or you don't get to play as many copies of it as you want. And this is a really good way to sort of put one into your deck for mostly free.
Regrowth is like the quintessential 101st card.
Oh yeah.
Like you could always, like so many decks could justify playing Regrowth as like an effect and cost, but then like you have to use a slot for it.
And this is especially good for the decks that already play Regrowth. Like I'm thinking Scape Shift especially. Like, and the fact that it says card, not permanent, which a lot of the versions being
that's huge.
formatted now are saying, the fact that it's actually just Regrowth is massive. Yeah. This is one of the best spell lands I've seen.
And it's just 2 and a green. Like it's just like a recollect, right? Like it's just
and it doesn't exiles, which is also
nothing
nice.
about this the regrowth side of this card looks like modern day regrowth effects.
No, doesn't exile, isn't chungused up with mana pips, is reasonably costed.
Heck yeah. All right, let's talk about the Crag Plate Baloth. 7 mana beast for 5 green. Kicker for 2 and a green. Can't be countered. Hexproof and haste. And if it was kicked, enters the battlefield with 4 +1/+1 counters. Jer, it can't be countered.
Great. Yay. Yeah, this card is a lot like Gaia's Revenge in that I'm not going to die to it often, but anytime anyone casts it against me, I'm going to die to it. Yeah, I mean, it's a reasonable top-end donkey. Not many decks are going to want to play this. Like, big mana decks can. It's nice that it can't be countered and has hexproof, so it's like ridiculously hard to remove from the table. It has haste, so it kills planeswalkers. It has kicker in case you needed, like...
Just in case you needed a 10/10, right? Yeah.
The fact that it doesn't have trample means maybe you don't play it over some other things, but Gaia's Revenge also didn't have trample. Like, you're just sort of trading off trample for the fact that like it's going to stay on the board basically the whole time. And actually 6/6 is like pretty beatable in combat, so maybe I'm not as high on this card. I don't know. It's pretty good. You're gonna
die to it. You'll lose a game to it, but you won't lose the match, you know?
I think that's a good way to look at it. Yeah, very wise.
Oh,
all right. What, you don't like me calling you wise?
Oh, you can't publicly praise me, dude. That just leads to more...
No. Let's keep inflating your head. I thought that was very good insight.
Stop. No, please.
You're good at magic. You're kind of a cutie.
Note to Jordan, please cut right here and throw everything out that's been recorded. Thank you.
Inscription of Abundance. 2 mana instant for 1 and a green. Has kicker for 2 and a green. Choose 1. Put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature. Target player gains X life, where X is the greatest power amongst creatures they control. Or target creature you control fights target creature you don't control, but if it was kicked, choose any number instead. Wheeler.
I really like this card. I think it's pretty simple and straightforward, and everything it does is going to be relevant. Again, all of these cards have been a series of effects that you're like, well, I wouldn't include a card that just had this, but the flexibility of all these is pretty great. Even if 1 out of the 3 is like, realistically, how often am I using this? But like every effect on here just kind of matches really well with the mana cost. And in green, like even if you get up to kicker, that's not super difficult to reach, right? Like you're playing a green deck, you'll probably hit 5 mana.
I need to rant for a second on this card. So green gets, out of the 3 good ones, the 3 that we've talked about, which are bug colors, green is the only one that's an instant and is the cheapest. Like, come on.
Well, it's green. It's a green card.
Best color in Magic.
Like, it's a green card in 2020.
Did you have some illusion that perhaps a different color was better in Magic? Look, blue was OP for too long.
I'm starting to get swayed.
Yeah. Now I have a question for the two of you. What deck wants this?
I'm playing this in Sorensen, I think, is where like there are better decks to play this in, but Sorensen's the deck where I look at this.
This is a kind of card like Blossoming Defense, where I think it gets a lot of value even just playing it in like mid-range or aggro decks. Like,
yeah.
Because it is a combat trick. You can just put 2 counters on a thing, which is like, I think people underrate how good that is. And also it's an instant speed removal spell.
Yeah, to me, this will fall in this camp of like Dramoka's Command.
I wanted to compare it there because I feel Dramoka's Command has way more relevant words in more matchups.
Well, I mean, it has a lot of relevant words on it. It's weird because like Dromoka's command is just more flexible in general, like with what it does. Like it's a 2-mana command.
Do you mind really quickly if I just talk about the modes on Dromoka's command if people aren't familiar? So 2-mana instant for a green and a white, choose 2. Prevent all damage target instant or sorcery would deal this turn. Target player sacrifice an enchantment. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Target creature you control fights target creature you don't control. And the prevent instant and sorcery damage and target player sacks an enchantment are where Dromoka's command shines compared to Inscription of Abundance. And I don't think enough people are playing Dromoka's command.
Yeah, what I was getting at is that nobody gives that. It's truly the Rodney Dangerfield of cards in Highlander. Nobody gives it any respect. And they need to because they will just lose to this card, right? Like anybody that's lost their Courser of Krufix and their other creature to 2 mana knows how bad it can feel.
You like nug their Courser Krufix and their Mana Elf.
Nice game sort of thing. But I think this is comparable to command, but also I think that like just the little things, like maybe the mana cost, like it's not even that big of a deal. I don't know. I look at this card and I think like this card is just better.
Well, also the ceiling is much higher.
Yeah, like I'm more into drawing this card than Dromoka's command if I'm playing a green X creature deck. I think you play both, right? If you're playing a green-white X creature deck. But I could foresee myself getting this off like Spellseeker, which is kind of weird if I'm playing like a Sorensen list with Spellseeker or like a Simic like Sorensen Tempo list. I guess I should specify, because like the life gain is shockingly relevant. Like if you're playing a deck that already has big-ish creatures, sometimes just 2 mana unexpected gain like 4 life or 5 life just changes a match. Right?
Yeah, definitely.
They just don't see it coming. But like you wouldn't want to include that as a card, but the fact that you get 2 other
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, 2 other really strong effects and then getting all 3 is just super easy to hit. Good card.
All right. Zandu Mammoth, 3-mana 3/3 elephant for 1 green. Landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, gains +2/+2 until end of turn. And on the other side, the Zandu Valley, a green source that enters the battlefield tapped. Jer.
This card's really good. It's a really efficient threat that hits like a truck and is a land if you need it.
Love it.
Yep.
Sort of also wish it had trample, but yeah, it's already pretty strong.
It's so pushed. Like
God.
People are already under. I'm calling it now that I've played with them a bunch. People are underestimating the spell lands, and a lot of people think they're insane.
I'm excited to actually come back to these maybe in a future episode and see our thoughts.
Yeah, this. Oh.
Zandu Nectar Pod, 2-mana 1/3 insect for 1 and a green. Landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, gain a life. You can't see me, but I have just the biggest grin on my face right now. We've done it. Like, okay, dedicated pod players always get really excited when there's like a new creature that helps with their pod chain. You know, they're like, oh, we have our 1 and our 3 and 4s are great, but our 2s are missing. I don't know. I don't play pod. I don't know how that works. I finally have the 2-drop I've needed for creatures that go infinite with Fastband.
Finally.
I mean, this is no Jaddy offshoot, but you'll take it.
So we have Jaddy Offshoot on 1, which is amazing. Jaddy Offshoot's only, is it a 0/3? I think it is.
Yeah.
I was worried it was a 0/2, but maybe I was confusing that with Hedron Crab. And of course, we have the precious Antelope at 3. Oh, baby.
And Kazandu Retreat.
Oh, Kazandu Retreat. Yeah, another solid one. Enchantment. That doesn't count as a creature, but Kazandu Retreat's also pretty solid. No, I like this. This is a very humble little card, and it's going to go probably only exactly in my Fastbond lists. This is a combo enabler. Fastbond deals 1 damage to whenever you play a land or an additional land. This gains you 1 life, and so you break even. And this allows you to start creating infinite loops, which are important to win the game.
I feel like your love for Grazing Gladeheart, which by now should be just blatantly evident to anybody that's ever listened to an episode of North 100. But if they needed that little extra push, your 3-drop was not Courser of Krufix, which lets you combo a couple of different ways and, sets up different things. But Grazing Gladeheart, just like, of course.
It gains you twice as much life, Wheeler.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it does technically do that.
I mean, I guess Courser's fine if you're in a bind, but it's no Antelope. It doesn't have horns, Wheeler. Antlers. Sorry, it doesn't have antlers. Antelopes have antlers.
You sold me on the antlers.
Perfect. All right, then we'll move on then. We're going to talk about a very powerful green reprint. Welcome back, the Snake. Welcome back, Lotus Cobra. 2 mana, 2/1 Snake for 1 and a green. Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, add 1 mana of any color. This is obviously very powerful. There's a lot of discussion around its reprinting. Wheeler and or Jer, where does this fit in our format?
More places than you'd think.
Yeah, like basically anywhere you're playing green creatures, it's reasonable. It shines in creature combo decks where getting ahead on mana and getting ahead on the board is very important to make your opponent react and tap out or just increase your clock because you're typically slower than the non-creature combo decks. Also very good in mid-range decks to deploy planeswalkers and 5 drops faster, which is why I like it. It lets you go 2 to 5.
Carries a sword.
That's my favorite number.
Like, there's a bunch of little things about this. Like, it already attacking for 2 is good on a mana dork. Like, that's already just the thing that you don't often get. 2 is a real amount of damage. The jump is huge. The fact that it can help fix mana which can be a little awkward with some of the top end cards in multicolored decks, right?
Yeah, the fact this makes any color is absurd.
Yeah, it's
like you could probably play any 4-drop with like 4 color pips for free.
I mean, it's regularly casting Omnath, and
I know that's what I was alluding to.
It's also just real. Pod decks, like birthing pod decks or neoform decks, are the ones that I really think about this card, just because they're typically 3 or more colors. So you're playing a whole bunch of fetch lands, and it's a 2-drop that's easy to cast, only needs 1 green pip, and 2 to 3 is arguably the most important step to get things going for a lot of those decks too. If you play Cobra on 2 into like fetch land, then you can Spellseeker for Time Walk immediately.
Or like the better curve of like Elf on 1, then Cobra fetch land on 2, and then you can also play a 3-drop on turn 2.
Yeah, that's really gross.
Which is quite good. And anytime Pat plays this against you, his hand has 2 fetch lands in it. Or on top of his deck.
Oh, amazing. Just the players who have it all. It's so nice to have it all. All right, let's move on to the Oren Reef Ooze. 3 mana 2/2 for 2 and a green. When it enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Whenever it attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on each attacking creature with a +1/+1 counter. Wheeler.
I think this card is really good in the counters decks. You could probably justify it in mono, like just aggressive mono green decks, and I know I'll be playing it in medium green. But yeah, it does everything right. For the counter specific decks, basically you want any of these cards to already you want them to come into play with counters or have the ability to set up something with a counter. Like if this was just a 3 mana 3/3 or whatever, it would not be like worth it at all. But the fact that it can get itself snowballing kind of, makes you want to attack with it as well, or help push for extra damage on the turn you play it. Great. It's easy to cast at 1 green pip. It's cheap. Yeah, I mean, I've been playing with this card a lot in Gladiator for the counters decks, and like the speed in which this card just ends games, immense, especially with any kind of counter doubling.
I don't think people understand that this attacks as a 4/4 and then a 5/5 and then a 6/6.
Yep.
It gets so out of hand, like so quickly.
What about your medium green list, Wheeler, with your ancient 2 mana, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the big thing is like that deck already just kind of has, just by coincidence, a subcategory of 1/1 counters, just because that's what a lot of really busted green creatures over the past couple of years have tacked onto them, or their Colonian Hydra and stuff. And so the fact that this can kind of just synergize with those things, as well as just, again, ancient 2 mana, and it's a snowbally threat all by itself, that's pretty cool and good. And playing this with like Nissa, who shakes the world, is extremely gross.
I like it. All right. Roiling Regrowth, 3 mana instant? Hold on, sorry, instant. I didn't read that line before. 3 mana instant for 2 and a green, sack a land, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them into play tapped, and then shuffle your library. Jer.
So this is obviously a throwback to Harrow. It's got an upside on Harrow, but also
totally
a rather large downside. So the upside is you don't sacrifice a land as part of the cost. You wait until the spell resolves, so you're less likely to get like super blown out. So the floor is higher, but the average case is much lower because the lands come into play tapped as opposed to untapped. So you could like play Harrow on your opponent's turn after they tapped out and then still mana leak their thing. Whereas you can't do this with Roiling Regrowth. For the dedicated ramp decks, that's probably not the hugest deal. Yeah, I don't know. Like, not many decks play Harrow just because getting it countered really stinks. I don't think I'd play this in Scape Shift. I don't really see anywhere else you'd play it. Maybe in this like landfall aggro deck. Gets you 2 landfall triggers for 3 mana and ramps you. Not the worst. I don't know. I don't really know if there's a spot for this.
A lot of people talking about this in standard. Scoot Swarm. 3 mana 1/1 insect for 2 and a green. Landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, create a 1/1 green insect creature token. If you control 6 or more lands, create a token that's a copy of Scoot Swarm. And if you haven't seen this card, taking things over, yes, those Scoot Swarms also double themselves over and over and over and over. And it starts to get a little bit silly very quickly. Jer, we're going to play it in Highlander?
I'm not. It's a really cool card, obviously harkening back to Scoot Mob, which got tall instead of wide. I just think it's a little slow for this format. You could maybe play it in a tokens deck. Those decks tend to go higher on lands because you really want to hit your land drops because you have some expensive payoffs. But I'm not sure if it really does enough in that strategy to warrant an inclusion.
Yeah, I think I'm on that same side.
Yeah, there's just too many wraths in the format. It's
Too many removal spells. There's like obviously Magical Christmas Land where it starts to pop off, but look, people in our format are barely playing Pack Rat, and that took over an entire block. The card was so dominant, and we see it in a black deck. We're like, oh, that's cool. Look, it's Pack Rat. Path. All right. Skyclave Pickaxe. 1 mana equipment for a single green. When it enters the battlefield, attach it to target creature you control, which is a cool ability all of the equipment in the set have. Landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, equipped creature gets +2/+2 and equips for 2 and a green. Jer.
This card definitely goes in the landfall aggro deck. The fact that it costs 1 and gets like 1 free equip is huge. Anytime you play a fetch land, that creature's getting +4/+4 until end of turn. In the landfall deck, you're going to have ways to get many more landfall triggers than that. I actually think this might be a reasonable card to include in non-landfall decks.
Like Gruul aggro. I'm trying, like, the nearest comparison I have to this card is Rancor.
Yeah, the fact that it pumps toughness is large because it means your creature's like +2/+2 is a lot, especially if you're playing green. Green's secret keyword on their creatures is it's the biggest creature. And on the off chance it wasn't the biggest creature, +2/+2 usually means you can make something that wasn't the biggest creature. So then you have a high chance of having both like the top 2 creatures, which is it's very hard for your opponent to block at that point. I think people are going to underrate this card. I'm going to play it a bunch and test it. It's possible it's not good enough outside of like more dedicated landsy decks that want to be aggressive, but I'd be interested in trying it.
Yeah, I feel like this is the kind of card where I'm trying to evaluate it with more like reservation, because we've been burned by too many pieces of equipment in our lives. And
oh yeah,
the fact that this is much better than Adventuring Gear, which is literally like this card, but it's all colorless, like a 1 mana to play, 1 mana to equip, landfall, equip creature gets +2/+2. It doesn't have the first like attachment ability, but like that card I wouldn't really recommend anybody playing outside of maybe that landfall deck that we talked about. But like I've been thinking about this card in like in blue green, like in a green X, even in like Golgari kind of deck.
Is it just because the free equip?
Yeah, because one of the biggest issues with like Adventuring Gear as a card, because that is a powerful effect, right? Like, because we play so many fetch lands, we have a bunch of ways of hitting additional land drops or just continuing to hit land drops throughout a game, is that with Adventuring Gear, effectively you need to pay 2 mana up front and then play a land, which can be a little awkward in the types of decks that want to play cheap equipment. And then also types of decks that play cheap equipment don't always hit their land drops. And
right.
So, but I think this one is more geared towards like, hey, play this. You're immediately going to get a benefit if you have some kind of evasion or trample. So like Nibble Obstructionist, Brazen Borrowers, or Big Dumbs, just like a Mana George Hydra or whatever, great. You're a deck that's going to hit multiple land drops because you have fetches, you have cards like Gush, you have ways of, recurring lands through Uro and Light from the Loam.
You actually just made me think of something there too, of the early play not having to equip it. You could go Taiga, Goblin Guide, crack for 2, turn 2, play this, equip, then play your second land. All of a sudden, if it's a fetch land, your Goblin Guide's cracking for 6 on turn 2.
Exactly, yeah.
Like, holy moly. Yeah, which Adventuring Gear obviously can't do, right? Wow.
Right. I think that's what I'm trying to say, is that like you can get the benefit out of this card early, but also just like the fact that the cost is mostly sitting on the like, all right, after you've gotten an initial use out of it, now you're going to have to pay more to utilize this. That's fine because you're a green deck, right? It's just like a mana sink for this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Well, and because it comes down so early, you're more likely to get value out of it earlier. So you're less likely to get got on like the first equip, which is one of the big downsides to many equipment that don't have this like auto attach trigger.
All right, let's talk about Swarm Shambler. 1 mana 0/0 Fungus Beast for a green. Enters the battlefield with 1/1/1 counter on it. Whenever creature you control, the +1/+1 counter on it becomes the target of a spell an opponent controls, make a 1/1 insect token, and then 1 and tap, much like Thopter Robot, put a +1/+1 counter on it.
Chronomaton, Hangerback Walker.
Like, I don't know why I'm like, it has the Hangerback Walker ability of making itself grow more. This is neat. What do you think, Wheeler?
Very good. It's in the kind of deck that, in a counters deck. I don't know if we've sufficiently relayed how actual factual good and like powerful the counters deck is. I mean, we've had a long time for this coming, right? It's a kind of archetype that's slowly been getting things.
Yeah, definitely.
Especially over this past year, having played more of this kind of deck than I thought I would, it's kind of terrifying. Like, it's a deck that is really good at taking advantage of its pointed cards, but you don't need to have like really threatening creatures, and stuff like this just keeps adding it on.
It gets so out of control so quickly.
Yeah, it's like it gets to this point where you just can't reliably address it because their creatures are too big, or they have added abilities like this and those decks rebuild super quickly. This is the kind of card that is cheap, has counters, puts on more counters, and then provides additional like, oh, you killed my creature in my deck that's all about making big creatures. Well, I'm going to get something out of it.
That middle ability on a 1-drop is so good.
Yeah, it's kind of just like a Tukatung Thallid sort of card, like the 1-drops and Aristocrats. Obviously, it's not a direct parallel, but it's just like a cheap enough card that if somebody wants to get rid of it through a spell, like it's replacing itself. So that's super awkward. And it gets big, really quickly, to the point where you're going to have to use spot removal and not kill it in combat. Yeah, the one downside is, though, it gets got by activated abilities. Planeswalkers are pretty cool at getting rid of it, but I mean, even a lot of them, like if they Oko this one, like maybe it has a bunch of counters on it. Yeah. If they Teferi this, like it's a 1-drop, so you could just play it again, right? So they have to kill it, but yeah.
All right, Juju Paragon, 2 mana 3/2 elf for 1 and a green, is also a cleric, rogue, warrior, and wizard. Has kicker 3, and when it enters the battlefield, if kicked, reveal the top 6 card of your library. You may put a card that shares a creature type with it from amongst them into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Wheeler.
Well, it has 3 power and costs 2 mana, so I think you might see this card beside Leatherback Baloth, just kind of as a general rule of thumb. Although maybe that deck has got beyond that. Great. Glad to hear. Terrain Elemental, still good.
2 mana 3/3 deck, or 2 mana 3/2 deck. Let's go.
Yeah, it's a relevant creature type.
I could also see it in Elves.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was getting at, is that I actually think this card is good in Elves. And I think that Elves is a lot better. Again, that feels like a deck that has like slowly been getting these small add-ons and like also benefiting from points changes, and this card's a slam dunk in that. And I'll probably play it in medium green too, just maybe give it a shot.
Yeah, just to spell it out to people in case they weren't quite there, the ability doesn't care just about cleric, rogue, warrior, and wizard. It also cares about elf,
the most important creature type.
Yeah, that's the big one.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, this card's really good. I mean, maybe it even sees playing like a green-white, like mid-rangey or aggro deck. Like, I don't know. Like, I mean,
Maybe.
JR more than I probably at this point has played more Watch Wolves than is admittable.
I've played some Watch Wolves and some nice fleeces.
I played a Watch Wolf in my day, and I guess that's true. Late game mana sync is fine because you have this great game plan of I'm just going to play as much power in the
I just
low.
don't know how often you are to hit in that deck. If you are to hit in those types of decks, you're most likely to hit like a mana elf, which by that point just like isn't that relevant. So there's probably a better 2-drop, but
Watch Wolf isn't a warrior, right? Yeah.
Well, I mean, if we're talking green white, there's a shockingly high amount of cards that are just like, oh, that's a Mother of Runes as a cleric, even Mind Sensor as a wizard.
But like oftentimes you're building that deck for power to cost ratio. Like sure you might incidentally hit some stuff, but it doesn't have the density of say the elf deck, right?
Right, but that's what I'm saying is that you don't play this card because it hits in a non-elf deck because it hits specifically like, oh, I'm going to hit this rogue that I've added just so I have an extra Juju Paragon hit. You just have a whole bunch of incidental creatures that you would already be playing in that kind of deck because, like, if you're playing a green-white aggressive deck and you don't have, like, Mother of Ruins, Giver of Ruins, or the Hate Berry kind of cards, then why are you playing this deck over other variants?
Yeah, that's fair. That's
But
fair.
yeah, I think it's more likely to hit stuff than you'd think, and then worst case scenario, it does just hit a mana door.
All right, let's move on to Tangled Florahedron. 2 mana 1/1 for 1 and a green. Elemental taps to add a green. And on the other side, it also is a green source that enters the battlefield tap. Tangled Veil. Jer.
why isn't it a druid? I think this card's pretty good.
That's interesting. I thought you'd be a lot higher on this card. I think that you might just slam this in basically any deck that has mana dorks that like
Interesting.
goes that gets up to like Paradise Druid and Sylvan Caryatid kind of stuff.
Sure.
Like I love this in Hoof. Absolutely. I love this in mana dork heavy decks that also just have like flexibility for double spelling or playing multiple things, or even like a red green rampish deck.
I like a lot of the spell lands is because it's good both in your opening hand or later on. Like if it's in your opening hand, you're more likely to need it as a land. So that's why I consider them good there. But whereas this card is, if you draw it late, it's like basically either a land or a land. Like it doesn't really have another mode. Whereas like the regrowth, it's like obviously you'd love to draw a regrowth in the late game.
For sure. I think that's the quality of so many of these flip cards. But I do think Florahedron or like the counter one, the 1 mana put a counter on it, which I'm starting to gain a little more respect for, is that like if you're playing if you're playing like Florahedron in a deck that already has a bunch of mana dorks, or at least minimum, 6 mana dork, like you're already kind of signing up for that to an extent.
Yeah, I guess.
Like you're already just like, I have these Dorcases, and it just kind of like helps your curve out, your early-ish curve, and that like, I might not use all my mana this turn, but I'm playing out these spells so that I develop for my big turn, big play next turn.
Yeah, I could definitely see this card being really good and it being better than I first thought. And I rate all the spell lands higher than I did in the first.
Oh yeah,
I've been like,
oh yeah,
definitely on an upwards trend of my hypeness on them. So even though I'm not super high on this, I could still see playing it in a bunch of decks.
I definitely changed my tune for the next card that we're coming up to, though it was almost, it was positive all the way through.
All right, let's move on to it then. Turn Timber Symbiosis, 7 mana sorcery, 4 green, green, green. Look at the top 7 cards of your library. You may put a creature card from among them onto the battlefield. If that card has converted mana cost 3 or less, it enters with an additional 3+1/+1 counters. Put the rest on the bottom in any order. And on the other side, Turn Timber Serpentine Wood is a green source that enters play tapped unless you pay 3 life. Wheeler.
So the only bad thing before that I had to kind of say about this card was that it's not as free as you think for some of the like hoof decks, just because it is important to make sure that you have some amount or like a reliable amount of forests in play, just because you have like 8 cards in your deck that are absurdly powerful, but they need forests. And so like often if you're building a Crater Hoof deck, you should like not overload on a lot of dual lands that aren't also, a Forest X land type. That's it. That's my criticism of this card. Other than that,
Nice.
You got green cards in your deck. You got green creatures. You got creatures that aren't green. You got creatures. You should probably play this card.
I love that it doesn't have a restriction for green creature. Awesome.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
All right, let's move on to gold cards now, and we're going to start with Aqiri, Fearless Voyager. 3 mana, 3/3 legendary core warrior for 1, a red, and a white. Whenever you attack a player with one or more equipped creatures, draw a card. 1 white mana, you may unattach an equipment from a creature you control. If you do, tap that creature and it gains indestructible until end of turn. This is slam dunk going into every red-white equipment deck I have ever played with and will ever play with in the future. This is fantastic. This is a great synergy card. There were a bunch of cards that came out that were a little bit clunky in, was it in Kaladesh maybe? It was like equipped creatures get +1/+1. Whenever equipped creature dies, draw a card. You know what I'm talking about? Those sort of effects.
Oath of the Gatewatch.
That was Oath of the Gatewatch that had those.
Yeah, the last time we were at Zendikar.
Oh, wow. And like that was nice and all, but this has a great like 3/3 for 3, fantastic. I mean, I'm happy it's just not like a 3/1 or something like that. It's a little bit harder to kill, and it has a attack ability and it has a defensive ability, and both of those make me incredibly happy. It is centered around equipment, which can be a little bit clunky, especially for those hands where you have all equipment and or no creatures, or vice versa, but like, nah, love it. All right, let's move on to the Brushfire Elemental. 2 mana, 1/1 for a red and a green. Has haste, can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less, and landfall gets +2/+2 until end of turn. Wheeler.
This card's going to kill a lot of people. That's it. It's really good. It's the haste is, nice. The fact that two or less is a lot. Like people have heard us say this a couple of times, and I think I even said it earlier in the episode, where like 2 is an actual power. Like 1 or less, like that's whatever, right? It's a thing, but it's not something you phone home about. 2 is when you start getting to like, oh, this is a real stat line.
It's like most creatures in Death and Taxes can't block this card.
Well, it's like it's the reason that people talk about how like you beat down with Snapcaster Mage as opposed to like beat down with like, I don't know, Augur of Bolus or like, okay, bad example. But you get what I mean, is like, this is why Snapcaster beatdown is a legitimate thing, right? 2 is twice as many as 1. And that's just a constant. So
I don't know, man. Like, unpopular opinion, I kind of feel like this card's a trap.
Really?
Yeah.
Explain yourself, young man.
I just like the downside of, obviously you can talk about this creature on turn 3 attacking as a 5/5 that's really hard to block with. The diminishing return on how good this card is, and if it's not in your opening hand, I see as a tremendous liability.
All right, I think I've scratched off all of the bumps on my quotation
bingo card or whatever.
Bingo card, yeah, for busting this one out again.
Please.
But one of the best red mages in Victoria once said, about Stormblood Berserker, a 2 mana 1/1 with Menace and Bloodthirst is just, hey, sometimes you just need a threat. Sometimes you just play it. Damage is damage, baby.
Sometimes you just need a 1 mana Menace.
Yeah.
All right. I stand corrected. I figured I may as well put that out there before the comments are like, but wait, what if when it's bad?
If like the fact that this is a static ability and that like if you're playing this kind of card, you're probably also playing some kind of pump spells, some, effects that modify the power and toughness of your creature, like, equipment, enchantments, just abilities from other creatures you have. Like, God, somebody's going to slap a GT on this and I won't be able to block with like any of my like 2-drop creatures in mono white or something. Yeah.
All right. Let's move on to Cleric of Life's Bond. 2 mana 2/2 vampire cleric for a white and a black. When another cleric enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. Whenever you gain a life for the first time each turn, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Wheeler.
I want to start this off by saying I want to save the cleric deck talk for when we get later in the multicolored cards. But for this one in particular, there are a lot of soul wardens that are all just clerics. In fact, basically all of them are also clerics. And we've received a whole bunch of cards over the past year that get better when you gain life or do a thing when you gain life. And it's also been a fascination of mine over the past year. And I'm very happy that this card exists. It's a Soul Warden and kind of like an Ajani's Pride Mate. Not as, all of a sudden I have a 7/7, but it's baseline, it's a 2 mana 2/2 that gets bigger and gains more life. Love the card.
Kragma, Skyclave Ravager, is a 0/0 legendary Hydra horror for 1, a black and a green, but enters the battlefield with 3+1/+1 counters on it, so 3 mana, 3/3. Whenever another creature you control dies, if it had a +1/+1 counter on it, put a +1/+1 counter on Kragma. When Kragma dies, create an XX black and green Hydra token where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on Kragma. Oh, you can't like manipulate the power and toughness to make it bigger. It specifically counts the counters. I was like, Berserk? What do you think, Wheeler?
I'll still berserk this card.
Yeah.
I did want you to get through all that before interrupting and saying that this card is called Gragma.
Did I get it backwards? Oh, I said Crag, not
You called
Grak.
it Kragma,
Oh, wow.
but I'm going to call... Well, I mean, now I'm just going to call it Kragma.
It's so much easier to say Grakma. Well, thank you for not interrupting me.
Hey, no worries. Kragma, though, it's like Rock Mama, right? Like a crag, and this is black-green, so it works out. Chat, you know what to do. Please stop. Nope, we had the ability to not go back there. Anywho, this card is good. I'd like it in the counters decks that we had mentioned previously. I like this in even just like a Golgari, like the Black Mold, right? The Golgari aggro deck, right? It's just, I'd probably even play this in Abzan, to be honest. Like, it's just a cheap threat that gets bigger when basically everything you control dies. And at the very least, if it dies, you also just make a 3/3, right? Like that's the minimum. If you play it and it dies immediately, you're probably just, you played a 3/3 that when it dies, you get another 3/3 and it can get bigger.
Update on the counters deck. What colors is it right now? It's base green.
It's always base green.
Yeah.
But there's literally like a playable higher end can just slaughter some of the best decks in our format, or like well-known decks in our format. There's builds of Bant, Bug, black green, 4-color, Abzan.
For everything but red, eh?
No, there's a Jund one too. In
What?
fact, Jund was like one of the first versions of this that just started slaughtering people.
Like Innistrad vampires do some pretty funky things with +1/+1
well,
counters.
I mean, that's the thing about counters is that like I think people still have in this idea in their head of like, oh, so you're just like what, hardened scales and doubling season and like
I think that's a trap, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but it's just not. There's just so many creatures that just put counters on themselves and are good, or they like just counters happens to be a word on their card, right? Like
they also just keep printing more and more mechanics that just incidentally have counters, like Fabricate and
right, yeah,
a bunch of others.
That's the way that they kind of like make these creatures that are just beat sticks like relevant in a world where every creature draws a card, gains 3 life, and puts a land into play. It's like, well, I guess if you're just a beat stick, you get some additional counters. Here you go, Dread Horde Butcher.
Yeah.
Like, don't be too, don't go too far now.
Amazing. All right, let's move on to Kazza Royal Chaser. 2 mana, 1/2 legendary human wizard for a blue and a red. Has flying and haste, and a tap ability that reads, the next instant or sorcery spell you cast this turn costs X less to cast, where X is the number of wizards you control as the ability resolves. Jer.
I just don't think there's really a spot for this. This card is sort of trying to do like a Baral impression, and Baral's sort of fallen by the wayside recently in at least control decks, not in the combo decks. But like there isn't really a wizard's deck, at least not that I'm aware of. And reducing your 1 spell per turn cycle probably just doesn't justify the inclusion.
What about just as a flying haste creature? Is there a deck that cares about that in red and blue?
Yes, but not a 1/2 flying haste creature. That does. If this had prowess, then maybe we could talk.
Yeah. All
Storm
right.
Chaser Mage, this is not.
Let's talk about the new Linvala. Linvala, Shield of the Sea Gate. 3 mana, 3/3 legendary angel wizard for 1, a white, and a blue. Has flying, and at the beginning of combat of your turn, if you have a full party, choose target non-land permanent an opponent controls. Until your next turn, it can't attack or block, and its activated abilities can't be activated. It's basically detain. Sacrifice Linvala, choose hexproof or indestructible. Creatures you control gain that ability until end of turn. So I guess we should really quickly, because we haven't touched on it this episode yet, what are the chances of having a full party in Canadian Highlander? Just really quick, Jer.
1.2%. If you build for it.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. So I guess we just evaluate this card as a 3-mana 3/3 flyer with a sack ability. Now, what's the 2-mana 2/1 flyer that you can sack to protect your team?
Selfless Spirit.
Selfless Spirit. How do we like this compared to Selfless Spirit?
It's good.
Both are very good.
I like this card. I'll probably try this card in blue-white tempo. I mean, the 3-drop is pretty competitive. This doesn't have flash, which is a downside, but
Yeah.
if you're trying to have a card that's going to protect your board and you're like, you're going to Wrath? Not today.
Yeah, like that ability is just really good.
Yeah.
It's an absurd amount of flexibility, and it's 3 power flyer. If, Brazen Barber, Nimble Obstructionist, and friends have taught us anything, it's those cards just end games very quickly, right? Mantis Rider, like it adds up. I'm absolutely slamming this in Just Skies, a Just Sky build with a bunch of flyers.
Good name. Just guys. Yeah.
Just Skies.
It's funny because all three of us seem to be kind of like, it's good. This is just like a very good card.
mean,
it's not exciting.
yeah, like I legitimately was outbid in the end, but I tried to buy the original color studies of this card. Like I love this card to absolute bits, but I'm at least a little more reserved in where it will actually find a home,
Yeah, I can easily see people not playing this card.
Yeah, there was an Esper Hate Bears list that was played last year. I mean, this was a while ago, but like that showed a lot of potential that hasn't really been touched since then. And this feels like something that could slide into that deck.
Flyers are also super good in that deck because they use the ninja theme. So
yeah, like if you're a deck with like Force of Will, Swords to Plowshares, Thoughtseize, and you're like that kind of stuff, and maybe your turn 2 is like Tidehall Skeller into this, or like Dark Confidant into this, like you don't need all those cheap spells. If you're like Thalia into this, like that's annoying. Maybe it's time to bust out the old Meekstone and Rebel Tribal and
I don't know. I'll probably put together blue-white tempo again, and this is going to have a home there until I cut it for like Deputy of Detention or something.
Play both.
I know. All right, let's talk about Moss Pit Skeleton. Black-green 2/2 plant skeleton with kicker 3. If it was kicked, enters the battlefield with 3 +1/+1 counters. Whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on a creature you control, if it's in your graveyard, you may put it on top of your library. Jer.
The fact that it says on top of your library sort of just makes me like sigh. Like,
God, I hate that zone.
I know, me too. It's like, just give me something I can work with. Like, yeah, I don't think it's going to be good enough just because it said on top of library and not into hand. Do you think it's good enough in the counters deck, Ben?
No, there's way too many hoops.
This feels like a close, but like not quite, right?
Yeah, really disappointed. I definitely misread this card.
It's no reassembling skeleton. It's no like any of the zombies that come back into play. Yeah. It does a very pale imitation of all of those cards.
When somebody relayed this card to me, very excited about it, as though if a creature enters the battlefield with 3 or more 1/1 counters on it, you bring this card from your graveyard to your hand. And I was like, oh my God, that's, 2-mana 2/2, not the most exciting, but this is really cool. Like
quite the game of telephone you went through there for that one.
Yeah, thanks Twitch chat. But it's just like, I was super excited. And then, top of library, done. Ugh. No.
Yeah. You're like, oh, hey, look, I'm dead. Oh, wait. No, I'm super dead. Turns out I put this skeleton on top, but I wanted literally anything else. Yeah.
The only things I'm putting on top, bud, are stuff off Mystical Tutor, Brainstorm, or Vengeful Pharaoh.
All right. Let's talk about the Murasa Root Grazer. 2-mana 2/3 beast for a green and a white, has vigilance. Tap ability. You may put a basic land card from your hand onto the battlefield. Tap ability. You return target basic land card you control to its owner's hand. What do you think, Jer?
I wish this didn't say basic land. Otherwise, I think you could play this in the likely Naya landfall aggro deck. That's probably fine there. It's going to get in some beats. It can ramp you, and once it gets to the late game and it gets outclassed on the battlefield, it can give you an extra landfall trigger here and there. Ensure you're getting at least 1 per turn at the very least. Yeah, it's not amazing, but I could see it fitting in that deck. It's probably not good enough to see play in other decks, especially because it has the basic restriction. But reasonable and cool card.
All right, let's talk about a new planeswalker here. Nihiri, Heir of the Ancients. 4 mana gets you 4 loyalty for 2 red-white. +1 ability, create a 1/1 white core warrior creature token, and you can just attach an equipment to it for free. -2, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal a warrior or equipment card from amongst them and put them into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And -3, Nihiri deals damage to target creature or planeswalker equal to twice the number of equipment you control. This is interesting. The -2 I'm a little bit nervous about. With deck building in this format, you're not as guaranteed to hit as, say, the downtick on a Tezzeret, right? As an example of look at the top 6 cards, put an artifact into your hand or something like that. It just
I've
being
whiffed on some Tezzeret minuses in my
Sure, but like it's way more consistent than warrior or equipment, right? Like I
Sure.
expect most of the time you're only going to play this for the +1 ability and the -3 ability. And honestly, both of those are pretty solid. Attaching for free is great, especially post Wrath, where your board might only have some equipment on it. This happens a lot in this game, right? Your board is empty other than like maybe a sword and a GT, and you're like, oh, this sucks. Even if I play a creature, nothing's going to happen. But for Nihiri to do what a planeswalker wants to do, which is protect itself and give you extra value on the equipment deck, I like that. And then the fact that this goes straight to a planeswalker is also kind of fantastic. Anyone got any differing opinions?
You said exactly what I thought about this card when I first read it.
You're like, Serge is going to say this?
No, to quote Serge Yager from like 30 seconds ago. Well, this sucks. I need a creature to do anything. I mean, like I just wish it was more. Like it's fine in the like equipment deck, right?
Yeah, it only works in that deck, and which is why I'm excited about it.
Yeah, and even then, is it better than like Gideon, Elspeth, other Elspeth?
No.
Like Chandra Torch Defiance?
Other Gideon?
Other Gideon?
Other Gideon?
Other, yeah, all 12 Chads. So, like, a great way to talk about that is mid-range card versus synergy card, right? And when you include it, when your deck is trying to do a thing versus when your deck is just trying to cram the best power level possible at that slot. And you really have to ask yourself, does this card do enough when the pieces fall together? Or you can just play it because it's sweet. I mean, I think Highlander still has a little bit of room for a flex slot. And I think I'd play Nihiri just because if you want to play with new cards, right?
Yeah, like I think it's the kind of card that if you're playing that deck, like I'm sure if you include it, it's going to do the thing that your deck wants to do.
It'll do enough, but there are better cards.
Yeah, I don't feel like it solves the issues of that. Maybe that's my concern, is I'm just like, it feels like it should have solved some of the issues of what equipment decks have. It kind of does, but just not enough.
The warrior's backbreaking and its -2 ability. Like, unless you're mega desperate, I don't think, unless you have a bunch of creatures and no equipment, I don't think you're -2ing ever.
I could see you -2ing, depending on the deck.
I mean, if you're already pretty far ahead on the board and this is at a bunch of loyalty, like you might as well try to get card advantage. Like if they don't have anything to target with the -3 and you already have a bunch of creatures.
Yeah, that's the time you're -2ing, right?
Trying to rebuild.
All right, let's talk about another planeswalker. Let's talk about Goth Nissa. Nissa of the Shadowed Bow. 4 mana, 4 loyalty for 2, a black and a green. I don't know how to pronounce that word. Is it bow?
Bows.
Bows?
Bows.
Shadowed Bow. Interesting. Landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, put a loyalty counter on Nissa. I haven't read this before. That's absurd. What?
Wait, you haven't even gotten to the abilities.
Yeah. Sorry. I just a planeswalker that gets free loyalty every time you play a land. My brain, it's just like that math gif right now where I don't even know what the loyalty does, but I'm here for it. All right. +1 ability. Untap target land you control. You may have it become a 3/3 elemental creature token with haste and Menace until end of turn. Cool. -5. You may put a creature card with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of lands you control onto the battlefield from your hand or graveyard with 2+1/+1 counters. What? Jer.
Wait, this from your hand?
Or graveyard.
Or graveyard.
Yes.
Well, I mean, I knew the graveyard part. I just haven't been playing it from my
From
hand.
your hand or graveyard? This card's absurd. Sorry. All right. Jared, talk about it.
Yeah, I think this card's quite good. It's basically enters with 6 loyalty, or you can use it as a 4 mana, a reanimation spell or cheat spell, should you have the want to do that. Otherwise, the lands it creates have haste and menace, which are 2 good abilities because then you can't misclick, and they're hard to block. Notably, it doesn't do the latest Nissa thing, which makes them forever lands forever. It goes back to until end of turn. So it can't protect itself, which is like kind of bad, but it comes in with 1 million loyalty on turn 4. So, it has the latest Planeswalker design of it can defend itself by just having enough loyalty to take a hit from most things. And yeah, the ceiling on the -5 ability is through the roof. The fact that it adds 2 counters for some reason is like, sure.
Right? As if the ability wasn't good enough. You're like, all right, scratching chin.
Yeah, I'll get back my questing beast. Now it's a 6/6. Good luck.
Just more of those incidental +1/+1 counters that Wheeler was talking about as well, right?
This card is very powerful and not very niche as opposed to the Nihiri we just discussed.
All right, let's talk about a card that is making Magic Twitter unhappy, and we'll just end the sentence there. Omnath, Locus of Creation. 4 mana 4/4 legendary elemental for red, green, white, blue. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card. Landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 4 life. If this was the first time this ability has resolved. If it's the second time, add 4 mana in a red, a green, a white, and a blue. And if it's the third time, Omnath deals 4 damage to each opponent and each planeswalker you don't control. So Omnath, the please play 3 lands every turn. This is kind of cute.
Thanks, I hate it.
Yeah, look, its hands are all the different colors of mana you're producing.
Cute is an interesting word, I gotta say.
Look, I can't combo with this. It only landfalls 3 times and then it stops. I mean, doesn't go in my Fastband deck.
The combo is your opponent just can't do anything. Like, you just win. You play it cantrips, then you play some more lands, you gain life so the aggro deck can't kill you. You get mana, so you get to cast free spells with the card you just drew. And if you get to play the 3rd land, all their planeswalkers and them are dead.
I do get where Serge is coming from. Like, it's so rarely do I get to combo with Oko and Teferi when I play eggs. It's possible. It's just wildly elaborate and often unnecessary because I've played Teferi or Oko. And now this card isn't the exact same power level as Oko. I'm not going to say something as brazen as that. But why is this card
4 mana? Like, I'll finish the sentence for you. Like,
well,
just make it 6 and then we're fine.
There's just a lot. This card is just a mess.
Like, they made the other one 7 mana. Perfect. Love it.
Yeah.
Great design.
Yeah, why? I don't like this card combos in the sense that you just get a free
everything
4/4 that has drawn you a card and then like also potentially either gained you 4 life. Okay, so it's like this is the world's biggest Frogmite or Burning Tree Emissary that also just draws you a card and then can potentially, depending on where you play it in the turn or what you have, could also just, kill their planeswalkers, dome them out, or just gain you some life. And also just combos with Caracas and does this every turn.
Like, I don't see it being as that oppressive in our format. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of people who are pretty...
The decks that are playing it are going to do that. The decks that play this are going to get 3 landfall triggers every turn and 1 or 2 on your opponent's turn.
Oh, look, as somebody who has tried to make lands happen for a very long time, there's Magical Christmas Land when it comes together, and there's often a lot of times you're like, cool, I got this 4 mana 4/4 in play, and it drew a card. Not gonna draw land for the rest of the game, am I?
There's so many tools.
You are getting more tools now. Yeah,
I do think like maybe if there weren't already lands decks that played these colors, played cards that are not just purely combo in them. And this already has a home, and if it didn't, it could certainly make a home, or people could justify making some changes.
And it's green Sun Zenithable.
Yeah, that's kind of cool. I mean, looks like I might have to start playing red in lands. And you're like, red in 6, Serge, red in 6, you idiot.
Yeah, this card really wants, like, God, I don't
know. I think this card's interesting. I'm not upset about it. I'm going to use the Wheeler. I think it's kind of cool and neat.
No.
Okay.
Just no. All right, fair enough.
It's really good.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to the Cleric that Wheeler likely wanted to talk about earlier. Aura, Skyclave Hierophant, 4-mana 3/3 legendary core cleric for 2, a white and a black, has lifelink. And when it or another cleric you control dies, return target cleric with CMC with a lesser CMC from the graveyard directly to the battlefield. What do you think, Wheeler?
So this is effectively the scrap trawler for clerics.
Yeah.
Which, you know, if you had to tell me, all right, Ben, you got to pick Black Lotus or Soul Warden, I'd probably pick the Lotus, admittedly, for which to return repeatedly. But I do genuinely believe that there is a deck that functions somewhere between like an aristocrat style deck and just like a black-white combo. I'm going to loop and kill you with this, kind of like a Sandy B deck almost. My operating title has been Cleric Clan Friarworks. I'm very proud of that. And the best part is I think it's actually good. There's just a shockingly large amount of good clerics, especially within the past 2 years. You don't need to run every single cleric. You just need enough that, you know, helps create loops. You play sack outlets, you get Academy Rector, you get a good use of your points. And this guy can make it all work, pulls it all together. And then also just like if you play this and attack with it, it's relevant. Right? 3, like gaining life, 3 power lifelink. That's not bad. So yeah, I think this card, I think there's very specifically 1, maybe 2-ish decks that will play this kind of card, and this card will be great in that.
Cool. Let's move on to the Umara Mystic. 3-mana 1/3 Merfolk Wizard for 1, a blue and red, has flying, and sort of this weird pseudo prowess. Whenever you cast an instant, sorcery, or wizard, the Mystic gets +2/+0 until end of turn. Wheeler.
Sweet Dragonauts.
Yeah, they took Wee Dragonauts, they made it a Merfolk Wizard instead, and then also just let it trigger off of wizard spells, which is fantastic because one of the big issues with like a blue-red prowess deck or like a 3-color like blitz deck that wants these kind of cards is that sometimes you have all creatures not enough pump. And because we've been getting more and more absurd creatures that also just happen to fit into this kind of deck, like Seagate Stormcaller, Magmatic Channeler, like those 2 cards alone from Zendikar, you kind of want to play more of these cards instead of, you know, doubling down on like a sorcery speed peak. And so the fact that this gets to trigger off of your creature heavy hands, as well as, you know, just fill the role of literal Wee Dragonauts with a better creature type, card's great. Absolute auto include in those kind of decks.
Heck yeah.
Can you play this in Merfolk? Like, could you be Rug Merfolk?
There's not really any red fish other than like this and Razor Fin Hunter.
But people have played Bant before, right?
Yeah.
And there's like, I know there's some, but not many. And like you get burn spells, which might be good for the deck too. I literally just thought of it when reading this card. So
yeah, I mean, maybe you could definitely do some kind of interesting things with like this card and like maybe Merfolk Regery where you like storm off kind of. But I don't know. It's not. If somebody killed me with it, I wouldn't be like, "What is going on?" I'd be like, "Oh, this is sick." Like, glad of it. I could see it, I guess.
All right, next up we have Yasharn Implacable Earth. 4-mana 4/4 beautiful pig. Legendary elemental boar for 2, a green, and a white. When it enters the battlefield, search your library for a basic forest and a basic plains, reveal them and put them into your hand, then shuffle your library. And players can't pay life or sack non-land permanents to cast spells or activate abilities. Jer.
Such a good pig. This card's pretty good. I wish it didn't say non-land, because that's one of the cool Angel of Jubilation abilities, is it stops your opponent's fetch lands. This will shut off some things, like eventually you'll get this into play against aristocrats, and then it'll be like, haha, pod will still beat you. Like, even if they have Birthing Pod in play. But this card's kind of cool. Like, it does draw you 2 cards. One thing I love about this is if you cast this on 4 mana, you're guaranteed to cast your one of the 5 drops that's clogging up your hand the turn after. So that's good, and a reason I should put it in my decks.
Wow, the soul read.
Yeah, I think it's pretty cool, especially if you're going down a more hate bearsy path. Pretty reasonable include 4/4/4, solid stats. Has the 4th toughness is huge, and it's a pig.
It's really good at setting up Armageddon.
That too.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Very nice. All right, let's talk about Zagras, Thief of Heartbeats. 6 mana, 4/4 legendary vampire rogue for 4, a black and a red. Costs 1 less to cast for each creature in your party. Has flying, death touch, and haste. Other creatures you control have death touch. It keeps going. And whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a planeswalker, destroy that planeswalker. Is this like Questing Beast, but in other colors? Have colors other than green just started getting keyword soup here? What do you think?
Well,
This isn't quite Questing Beast. I could see it being reasonable in like the black red like play every Stormbreath Dragon variant there is deck.
I could see this even popping up in just vampires. Like vampire tribal needs one of the issues of that deck is it also just doesn't have, or for a longest time didn't have, a lot of closers. And it's a deck that has a variety of class creature types. Like there's just every single creature type is checked off, right? Like there's a bunch of clerics, wizards, soldiers, all that jazz. Or not soldiers, warriors, all that jazz. And it does hit, like, this is really gross. Like when it hits play and attacks, right?
When it makes all your other creatures that are being outclassed attackers as well,
Yeah.
which is pretty interesting.
Makes the cards that are pretty irrelevant without your additional tribal support, turns them into really awkward cards to block. He's just kind of floating.
All right, let's talk about the final card in our 3-part set review, Zareth San the Trickster. 5 mana, 4/4 legendary merfolk rogue for 3, a blue and a black. Has flash, and has this sort of weird ninjutsu but for rogues. So 2, a blue and a black, and return an unblocked attacking rogue you control. Put it directly in from your hand into play, tapped and attacking. And then whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you may put target permanent card from that player's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control.
I love this card.
You just love this card? All right, start us off, Jar.
It has flash, and in a blue-black deck, blue-black X deck, you're very likely to be able to set up getting the triggered ability off once, which is, I think, all you're going to need to likely win the game from that point.
I'm willing to admit, you know, I'm a grown-up. I'm a grown man, I hear. I can admit my mistakes. And Fallen Shinobi, you know what? That card's better than I thought it was, for sure. This card is not Fallen Shinobi.
No.
I
Certainly
think that's
not, no.
Yeah, I want to be clear. But what I'm trying to get at, and the strength for Shinobi, is that creatures are not blocked as often. And they're also not blocked as often while, like, creatures in this format will find themselves not blocked and attacking an opponent that is tapped out or tapped low. So I think it's pretty realistic to play this card for the whole fancy schmancy, haha, I got you. I've returned my, rogue and I'm now getting your stuff. But the best part is you're not pushed into doing that. You could just flash this EOT to just be like, all right, I guess I'll tap out to try and do this thing at your end step.
And also, people in Highlander still don't respect combat tricks. So one of the times they will elect to try to kill your creatures is before damage after blockers. And having done this a bunch with Fallen Shinobi and the other ninjas, like, you'll be able to save creatures and get them, like, the full meal deal.
Save your creature and get them. It slices, it dices.
Yeah.
Yeah, this card's gonna win some games. I like it.
Yeah. Can we go back to Yasharn for a second? It says players can't pay life or sacrifice non-land permanents to cast spells or activate abilities.
Okay.
Does that mean they can't activate fetch lands?
If a spell or activated ability has a cost that requires a payer to play life, such as the activated ability granted by whatever, or sacrifice a permanent, that spell or ability can't be cast or activated. You wondering where the comma is if the pay life affects fetch lands? Players can't pay life or sack non-land permanents to cast spells.
Yeah, I should know this. I've just been staring at it for like the past 10 minutes, and my brain
If a
just
spell or activated ability has a cost.
Well, it's an or, right? And so there is an ability.
I think it shuts off fetch lands here.
I think it does because of the pay life part.
Yeah, I think
Because the pay life part isn't attached to non-land, right?
yeah, it's or. No, I think you're right. I think that shuts off fetch lands.
So it shuts
Wow.
off fetch lands that you have to pay life. You can do it with like Fabled Passage, but
Like my brain hasn't, adopted to a lot of the new cards. It's like, no, fetch lands cost you life, dog. That's what they do. Does that change your opinion on the pig?
I definitely said that you couldn't, but it doesn't. But I think it does shut off fetch lands, which makes this card much better than I thought it was. And now I'm definitely going to play it.
Heck yeah. All right, everybody. Well, that is going to do it for our 3-part Zendikar Rising set review. As always, if you think we missed anything, please let us know in the comments down below. A reminder, this podcast is brought to you by you with your support of the Patreon over at patreon.com/loadingreadyrun. Also, that's not your style. Reminder, you can also support us through YouTube subscriptions. Thank you very much for listening. I've been Serge, joined by Jer and Wheeler, and we will see you next time. Bye.